The snow fell harder than anything Delilah Zimmerman had seen in her 21 years, turning the Arizona desert into a white wasteland that seemed determined to swallow her and her younger sister whole. She pressed 18-year-old Daphne closer against her body, both of them shivering beneath the single threadbare blanket they'd managed to grab before their stepfather had thrown them out into the December night, screaming that he wouldn't feed two more mouths now that their mother was dead. The wind howled through the canyon, past 15 miles north of Coolidge, and Delilah wondered if this frozen darkness would be the last thing either of them would ever see. "I can't feel my feet anymore," Daphne whispered, her lips already taking on a bluish tint that terrified Delilah more than anything else in this nightmare. "Just hold on," Delilah managed through chattering teeth, though she had no idea what they were holding on for. They'd been walking for hours after being forced from the only home they'd known, trying to reach Coolidge where their mother's sister supposedly lived. But the freak blizzard had descended so quickly that they'd lost the road entirely. Now they huddled against a rock formation that provided almost no shelter, and Delilah could feel her own strength fading with each gust of icy wind. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the storm, so unexpected that Delilah thought at first she was imagining it. But then a dark shape emerged from the swirling snow, a rider on a massive horse, and she tried to call out, but her voice came as barely more than a croak. The rider must have seen them anyway because the horse changed direction, moving closer until Delilah could make out a man's form wrapped in a heavy coat, his hat pulled low against the weather. "Jesus Christ," the man said, dismounting in one smooth motion and crouching beside them. "How long have you two been out here?" "Since sunset," Delilah managed, trying to keep Daphne upright as her sister's eyes started to close. "Please, my sister, she needs help." The cowboy didn't waste time with more questions. He shrugged out of his thick coat and wrapped it around both of them, then lifted Daphne into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. "Can you stand?" he asked Delilah, his voice rough but not unkind. She tried, but her legs buckled immediately. Without hesitation, the man shifted Daphne to one arm and used the other to haul Delilah to her feet, steadying her against his side. "My horse can carry all three of us for a short distance. My camp is just over that ridge. Hold onto the saddle horn and don't let go." Somehow he got them all onto the horse, Daphne cradled in front of him and Delilah clinging behind, her arms wrapped around his waist because she didn't have the strength to hold the saddle. She could feel the solid warmth of him even through his shirt, and some distant part of her mind registered that he'd given them his only coat without a second thought. The ride seemed to last both forever and no time at all. When they stopped, Delilah saw a sturdy canvas tent staked securely against the wind, smoke rising from a pipe that indicated a stove inside. The cowboy carried Daphne in first, laying her on a bedroll near the small wood stove, then came back for Delilah. "I can walk," she protested weakly, but he was already lifting her, carrying her inside where the warmth hit her like a physical force. "You'll both be warm forever," he said, settling her next to her sister and immediately adding more wood to the stove. "I promise you that. But first we need to get your body temperatures up slowly. Too fast, and it'll do more harm than good." He worked with practiced efficiency, wrapping them in dry blankets, checking their fingers and toes for frostbite, holding a tin cup of lukewarm water to their lips and making them take small sips. Only when he seemed satisfied that they were stable did he finally pull a blanket around his own shoulders and sit back on his heels, studying them with eyes that were a startling shade of blue-green even in the dim lamplight. "I'm Yates, Jameson," he said. "And I'm guessing you two have quite a story to tell me." Delilah's teeth had finally stopped chattering enough for her to speak properly. "I'm Delilah Zimmerman, This is my sister Daphne. Our mother died 3 weeks ago from pneumonia, and our stepfather decided he didn't want the burden of raising us. He threw us out tonight, told us to find our own way in the world. Yates's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. In the middle of a blizzard, what kind of man does that? The kind who only married our mother for her small piece of land, Daphne said, her voice still weak but stronger than before. The kind who started drinking away his grief the day she was buried and hasn't stopped since. Well, he's an idiot and a bastard, Yates said bluntly. And you're both safe now. This storm should break by morning. Where were you headed, Coolidge? Delilah said. Our mother's sister lives there, or at least she did 5 years ago. We were hoping she'd take us in. Coolidge is where I'm headed too, Yates said. I've got business at the lumber mill there, and I'm meeting my brother to discuss a property we inherited from our uncle. I can take you there once the weather clears. We don't have money to pay you, Delilah said quietly, shame burning in her chest. We don't have anything except the clothes on our backs. Yates looked at her for a long moment, something in his expression softening. Did I ask for payment? You two need help and I'm in a position to give it. That's all there is to it. Daphne started shivering again, violent tremors that shook her whole body, and Yates quickly moved closer, pulling more blankets around her. That's normal, he assured them. Means your body is warming up and your circulation is coming back. It'll pass. He stayed close to both of them through the night, monitoring their condition, making them drink water and eventually thin broth that he heated on the stove. Delilah found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and strong, capable hands that moved with confidence whether he was stoking the fire or checking Daphne's pulse. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent most of their time outdoors, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he hadn't smiled much tonight. What were you doing out in this weather? Delilah finally asked as the storm continued to rage outside. I was supposed to reach Coolidge yesterday, but my horse threw a shoe about 20 miles back. By the time I got him reshod at a ranch I passed, the storm was rolling in. I made camp here to wait it out. He glanced at her, and this time there was the hint of a smile. Good thing I did, or I wouldn't have found you too. You saved our lives, Daphne said softly. We wouldn't have lasted another hour out there. Then I'm glad I was here, Yates said simply. Try to get some sleep. Both of you, you're safe now and you need rest. Delilah wanted to stay awake, wanted to make sure this wasn't some dream brought on by hypothermia. But exhaustion pulled at her with irresistible force. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was the sound of Yates adding more wood to the stove and the feeling of warmth seeping into her bones. She woke to daylight filtering through the tent canvas and the smell of coffee brewing. Daphne was still asleep beside her, breathing deep and even color back in her cheeks. Yates sat near the stove, pouring coffee into a battered tin cup. Morning, he said when he noticed her stirring. How do you feel? Like I got trampled by a herd of cattle, Delilah admitted, sitting up slowly. Everything ached, but it was the ache of muscles worked too hard, not the dangerous numbness of the night before. But alive, thanks to you. He handed her the cup of coffee. Storm broke about 2 hours ago. Sun's out and the snow is already starting to melt. Arizona doesn't hold on to winter weather long, even when it comes on fierce. We can head to Coolidge whenever you're both ready to travel. Delilah sipped the coffee, grateful for its warmth and bitter strength. Mr. Jameson, I meant what I said last night. We don't have any way to repay your kindness. But someday, somehow, I will pay you back. Call me Yates, he said. And I told you no payment necessary, though I wouldn't object to knowing more about you both. How'd you end up in Arizona territory with a stepfather like that? So Delilah told him, the words coming easier in the morning light. How their father had died when she was 12 and Daphne was 9, kicked by a horse that startled. How their mother had struggled for years to keep their small homestead going before finally accepting Robert Winters's proposal 4 years ago. How Robert had seemed kind at first, but the mask had slipped after the wedding, revealing a man prone to drink and anger. Mama kept us safe from the worst of it, Delilah said. She was strong, stronger than anyone I've ever known, but the pneumonia took her so fast. One day she was coughing, 3 weeks later she was gone. And Robert didn't even wait for the ground to settle on her grave before he started talking about how he couldn't afford to keep us. My mother died when I was young too, Yates said quietly. Different circumstances, but I remember that feeling of the world shifting under your feet. My father raised me and my brother on his own, taught us everything we know about horses and ranching. He died 2 years ago, and now it's just me and my brother, Zachary, trying to figure out what comes next. Daphne stirred then, waking with a start before relaxing when she saw where she was. I thought maybe I dreamed the rescue, she said. No dream, Yates assured her. You're both very much alive and safe. Think you can travel today? Yes, Daphne said firmly, though Delilah could see the lingering exhaustion in her sister's eyes. The sooner we get to Coolidge and find Aunt Martha, the better. They broke camp together, Yates showing them how to fold the tent properly and secure it to his horse's pack saddle. He'd brought 2 horses, Delilah realized, one for riding and one for gear, which meant they could all travel more comfortably. He put Daphne on the pack horse and Delilah on his riding horse, then walked alongside them, leading both animals with easy confidence. The landscape transformed as the sun climbed higher, the snow melting into the thirsty desert soil. By midday, only patches remained in shaded areas, and the temperature had risen enough that they all shed their outer layers. Yates talked as they traveled, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the region that made both sisters smile despite their circumstances. See that rock formation, he said, gesturing to a cluster of red stone pillars. Local legend says it's the remains of ancient giants who were turned to stone for angering the spirits. More likely it's just erosion, but I like the story better. You believe in spirits? Daphne asked. I believe the land has memory, Yates said thoughtfully. And I believe in treating it with respect. Beyond that, I figure I'll find out the truth when my time comes, same as everyone else. They reached Coolidge in the late afternoon. The small town spread out along the Gila River Valley, with the kind of haphazard charm that defined most Arizona settlements. Buildings of adobe and wood lined the main street, and Delilah could see the lumber mill Yates had mentioned at the edge of town, its tall chimney reaching toward the cloudless sky. Where did your aunt live? Yates asked. I'm not sure exactly, Delilah admitted. We only visited once years ago. I remember it was a white house with blue shutters on the east side of town. Let's try the general store first, Yates suggested. Small town like this, the shopkeeper will know everyone. The general store was warm and crowded with goods, everything from fabric to farm tools to jars of preserves. The woman behind the counter looked up as they entered, her eyes widening slightly at their disheveled appearance. Help you folks? She asked. We're looking for Martha Zimmerman, Delilah said. She's my aunt. We were told she lives in Coolidge. The woman's expression shifted to something sympathetic. Martha passed away last spring, dear. Fever took her. I'm sorry if you came all this way to find her. The words hit Delilah like a physical blow. Their last hope, their only plan, gone. Beside her, Daphne made a small sound of distress, and Delilah reached for her sister's hand, trying to be strong even as her own vision blurred with tears. "Is there anyone else?" Yates asked quietly. "Any other family in the area? Not that I know of," the shopkeeper said. "Martha lived alone, kept to herself mostly. Are you girls in trouble?" "We're managing," Delilah said, though her voice shook. "Thank you for your help." Outside, the sunlight seemed too bright, too cheerful for the despair settling in Delilah's chest. They had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, and winter in the desert might be milder than other places, but it was still dangerous for two young women alone with no resources. "Come on," Yates said gently, his hand on Delilah's elbow. "Let's get some food in you both, and we'll figure this out." He led them to a small restaurant, insisting they order whatever they wanted and waving away Delilah's protests about payment. As they ate, Delilah could see him thinking, working through something in his mind. "I have a proposition," he finally said, "and I want you to really consider it before you answer." "We're listening," Delilah said warily. "The property my brother and I inherited is a ranch about 10 miles north of here. It needs work, a lot of work, but it's got a good house, a barn, and enough land to run cattle. We're planning to fix it up and start a proper operation. We could use help around the place, someone to cook and keep the house and maybe help with the books. It wouldn't be charity. You'd be working, earning your keep and a wage besides." "Both of us?" Daphne asked. "Both of you," Yates confirmed. "The house is big enough. And honestly, having someone to cook proper meals instead of the bachelor fare Zachary and I have been managing would be worth it alone." Delilah wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to grab this lifeline with both hands, but caution held her back. "Why would you do this? You don't know us. We could be terrible workers or thieves or anything." Yates met her eyes steadily. "Last night, when you could barely speak, your first words were about your sister. Not yourself, not your own suffering, but making sure Daphne got help. That tells me what kind of person you are. And this morning, you both helped break camp without being asked, followed instructions, didn't complain even though I know you're both hurting. That tells me you're not afraid of hard work. As for the rest, I'm a decent judge of character, and my gut says you're both exactly the kind of people I want around." "We don't know anything about ranching," Delilah said. "You can learn," Yates said. "Question is, do you want to?" Delilah looked at Daphne, seeing her own hope reflected in her sister's eyes. They had no other options, nowhere else to turn, but more than that, something about Yates Jameson made her want to trust him. Maybe it was the way he'd given them his coat without hesitation, or the way he'd stayed up all night making sure they were safe, or the way he talked to them like they were people deserving of respect rather than burdens to be managed. "Yes," she said. "We want to. And thank you, Yates, for everything." The smile that broke across his face was like sunshine, warm and genuine. "Good. That's settled then. We'll stay at the boarding house tonight, get you both some proper rest and maybe some new clothes from the general store. Tomorrow we'll head out to the ranch and meet Zachary." That night, lying in a real bed in a clean room at the boarding house, Delilah stared at the ceiling and marveled at how much her life had changed in 24 hours. Yesterday she'd been certain she and Daphne would die in the snow. Today they had jobs, a place to live, and a future that held possibility instead of just fear. "Delilah," Daphne whispered from the other bed. "Do you think we can really do this?" "I think we can try," Delilah said. "And I think Yates is a good man. We've been lucky, Daph. Against all odds, we've been lucky." "I like him," Daphne said, "and I think you do too, in a different way than I do." Delilah felt her cheeks warm in the darkness. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Daphne said, but there was affection in her voice, not teasing. "I saw how you looked at him and how he looked at you." "We just met," Delilah protested, And he's our employer now. It wouldn't be appropriate to think of him that way." "Maybe not yet," Daphne said, "but I bet that changes." Delilah didn't answer, but lying there in the dark, she couldn't help thinking about Yates's smile, the steadiness in his blue-green eyes, the gentle strength of his hands. She'd never had time for romance before, too busy helping her mother and then grieving her loss. But something about Yates made her want to believe in possibilities she'd thought were closed to girls in her situation. The next morning, Yates took them to the general store and insisted on outfitting them both with practical clothes suitable for ranch work, sturdy boots, wool coats, and enough undergarments and necessities to last. When Delilah tried to protest the expense, he simply said, "Consider it an advance on your wages," in a tone that brooked no argument. They left Coolidge mid-morning, riding northwest into country that grew increasingly beautiful as they traveled. The land rolled in gentle waves, dotted with mesquite and saguaro cactus, with mountains rising purple in the distance. Yates pointed out where property lines ran, explaining that the ranch encompassed nearly 500 acres, much of it suitable for grazing. "Our uncle won it in a card game back in the 70s, he said. "Never did much with it except run a few head of cattle now and then. When he died, he split everything between me and Zachary equally, said he figured we'd know what to do with it. So here we are, trying to make something of it." The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, and Delilah felt her breath catch. It was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling adobe structure with a wide porch and actual glass windows. The barn nearby needed some repair work, but it was solid, and she could see a chicken coop, a well with a good pump, and even a small orchard of fruit trees. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, tall and lean like Yates but with lighter hair and a more reserved expression. This had to be Zachary. "You found the place all right," Zachary called out, then stopped when he saw Delilah and Daphne. "And you brought company." "Zach, this is Delilah and Daphne Zimmerman," Yates said, dismounting and helping both sisters down. "They're going to be helping us run this place." "Delilah, Daphne, my brother Zachary." Zachary's eyes narrowed slightly, and Delilah braced herself for skepticism or questions. Instead, he just nodded and said, "Welcome to the ranch. Fair warning, the house is a mess and we've been living on beans and hardtack for a week." "We can fix that," Delilah said with more confidence than she felt. "If you'll show us the kitchen, we'll have a proper dinner ready by evening." Something in Zachary's expression eased. "That alone makes you worth your weight in gold. Come on, I'll give you the tour." The house was indeed a mess. Dust everywhere and dishes piled in the sink, but the bones of it were good. There was a large kitchen with a real stove, a dining area, a sitting room with a fireplace, and 4 bedrooms upstairs. Zachary showed them to 2 of the bedrooms, smaller than the other 2 but clean and bright with windows facing east. "Yates and I are in the other 2 rooms," he said. "Bathroom is at the end of the hall. We've got running water from the well, which is more than a lot of places out here can say." Uncle Silas might not have ranched much, but he liked his comforts. Left alone in their new rooms, Delilah and Daphne looked at each other with matching expressions of wonder. "I can't believe this is real," Daphne said. "Neither can I," Delilah admitted, "but we need to prove ourselves." Starting with that dinner, they spent the afternoon cleaning the kitchen and taking stock of supplies. The brothers had laid in basic staples but little else, so Delilah got creative with what was available, making biscuits from scratch and a stew with dried beef, canned tomatoes, and vegetables from the root cellar. By the time the sun started to set, wonderful smells filled the house, and both brothers appeared in the kitchen with expressions of hope. "Is that actual food?" Zachary asked. "Sit down and find out," Delilah said, ladling stew into bowls while Daphne brought over the biscuits, hot and golden. The first bite seemed to stun both brothers into silence. Then Yates groaned and said, "I take back every doubt, you two are never leaving." "This is incredible," Zachary agreed. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Our mother," Daphne said softly. "She taught us everything. Said a woman who could cook well would never starve, no matter what else happened." "Smart woman," Zachary said. "I'm sorry you lost her." Over dinner, Yates explained to his brother how he'd found the sisters, giving them credit for their courage while downplaying his own role in the rescue. Zachary listened carefully, his gaze moving between Delilah and Daphne with increasing approval. "Sounds like you two have had a rough time," he said when Yates finished. "But if you're willing to work hard, we'll make sure you're taken care of here. Yates and I don't have much experience running a ranch this size, so we'll all be learning together." "What's the plan?" Delilah asked. "For the ranch, I mean." "Cattle primarily," Yates said. "We've got 50 head arriving next week from a breeder north of Phoenix. The idea is to build up the herd, establish the ranch as a reliable source of quality stock. It'll take a few years to really get going, but the market is strong right now. And in the meantime, we fix up everything that's falling apart," Zachary added. "The barn needs new doors, half the fences need replacing, and the irrigation system for the orchard is a disaster. We'll be busy." They settled into a routine over the following weeks that felt surprisingly natural. Delilah and Daphne rose early to make breakfast. Then Delilah would handle the housework and meal preparation while Daphne helped the brothers with outdoor tasks. Daphne proved to have a natural affinity for the animals, gentling the horses and fearlessly wading in to help with the cattle when they arrived. Delilah found herself managing not just the house but the ranch's accounts, discovering she had a head for numbers that Yates appreciated. They'd sit together in the evenings, going over expenses and income, planning purchases and discussing strategy. Those were Delilah's favorite times, when it was just the two of them in the lamplight, their heads bent close over the ledger books. "You're better at this than I am," Yates admitted one night. "I can work cattle and fix fences all day, but trying to balance the books makes my head hurt." "Everyone has different strengths," Delilah said. "You're teaching me about ranching. I can help with the business side." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Delilah felt something shift in the air between them. "You're remarkable, you know that. You and Daphne both. The way you've thrown yourselves into this, made this house a home, never complained even when things got hard. Where else would we go?" Delilah said lightly, trying to ignore the way her heart raced. "You saved our lives, Yates. The least we can do is make sure you eat well and your books balance." "It's more than that," he said seriously. "You've become part of this place, part of what we're building. I can't imagine the ranch without you anymore." The intensity in his voice made Delilah's breath catch. She wanted to say something, but the words tangled in her throat, a confusion of gratitude and attraction and fear of ruining what they had. Yates seemed to sense her hesitation because he smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Anyway, I should let you get some rest. Early day tomorrow. We're moving the herd to the north pasture." After he left, Delilah sat for a long time staring at the ledger without seeing it, her mind replaying the conversation, the look in his eyes. She'd been so focused on proving herself as a worker, on making sure she and Daphne were valuable enough to keep around, that she'd tried to ignore the growing feelings she had for Yates. But they were becoming impossible to deny. He was unlike any man she'd ever known. Patient and kind, but with a core of strength that made her feel safe. He treated her like an equal, valued her opinions, laughed at her jokes. And sometimes, when she caught him watching her, she saw something in his eyes that made her think maybe, just maybe, he felt the same way she did. But he'd never said anything, never made any move that crossed the line from employer to something more personal. Maybe she was imagining things, seeing what she wanted to see. Or maybe he was being respectful, giving her space to heal from the trauma of losing her mother and being cast out. Either way, Delilah didn't know how to bridge that gap, or even if she should try. Winter deepened into January, bringing cooler temperatures but nothing like the blizzard that had nearly killed them. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. The cattle grew sleek and healthy, the repairs progressed steadily, and the accounts showed they were actually turning a small profit. Zachary hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the heavier work, and the place started to feel like a real working ranch rather than a hopeful experiment. On a Friday evening in late January, Zachary announced he was riding into Coolidge for supplies and wouldn't be back until the next day. Daphne, who'd become friends with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, had been invited to spend the night at their place. Suddenly, Delilah and Yates found themselves alone in the house for the first time since she'd arrived. They ate dinner together in the kitchen, the conversation easy as always, discussing the ranch and making plans for spring. But underneath the normalcy, Delilah felt a tension building, an awareness of his presence that made her hyper-conscious of every movement, every glance. "I'll do the dishes," Yates said when they'd finished eating. "You've been working all day." "So have you," Delilah protested, but he was already rolling up his sleeves and pumping water into the sink. "Then you can dry," he said with a grin. Teamwork. They worked side by side, falling into a comfortable rhythm. Their hands brushed as she took a wet plate from him, and Delilah felt a jolt of electricity at the contact. When she glanced up, she found Yates watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Delilah," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." He dried his hands on a towel, then turned to face her fully. "Do you ever think about that night in the storm, when I found you?" "All the time," she admitted. "You saved our lives, Yates. I think about that every single day." "That's not what I mean," he said. "I mean, do you ever think about how it felt like fate, like I was meant to find you, meant to bring you here?" Her heart hammered in her chest. "Sometimes, do you?" "Every day," he said, echoing her words. "From the moment I saw you huddled there in the snow, something in me knew you were important. And every day since, that feeling has just gotten stronger." "Yates, she started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said. "I know the timing isn't ideal. I know you're still grieving your mother, still adjusting to everything that's happened. And I know I'm technically your employer, which makes this complicated. But Delilah, I'm falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since that first night, and I needed you to know." The words hung in the air between them, terrifying and wonderful. Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears, tears of relief that she hadn't been imagining things, that what she felt wasn't one-sided. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, trying to keep things professional, but Yates, I can't help it. You're the kindest, most genuinely good person I've ever met, and being around you makes me happier than I've been in years." The smile that broke across his face was radiant. He reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I don't want you to feel pressured," he said. "We can take this as slow as you need, but I had to tell you, had to know if there was any chance you might feel the same way." "More than a chance," Delilah said, stepping closer. "I do feel the same way, I have for weeks now." Yates lifted his free hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, "inside and out. I look at you and I see strength and grace and determination, and I think about how lucky I was to be riding through that canyon that night." "I'm the lucky one," Delilah said. "You gave us everything. A home, a purpose, a future. And now this." "This is just the beginning," Yates said, and then he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if he was still half afraid she might pull away. But Delilah melted into him, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the solid beat of his heart under her palm. The kiss deepened, growing more confident, and Delilah felt like she was flying, like everything in her life had been leading to this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he said. "Me too," Delilah admitted, "though I wasn't sure you saw me that way." "Are you kidding?" Yates laughed. "Zach's been teasing me for weeks about how obvious I am. Every time you walk into a room, I can't stop staring. He says I'm pathetic." "You're not pathetic," Delilah said firmly. "You're perfect." They moved to the sitting room, settling on the sofa with Yates's arm around her shoulders, Delilah tucked against his side. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for the future, all the little details that people in love want to know about each other. Yates told her about growing up on his father's ranch in Texas, learning to ride before he could walk, the bond he had with his brother. He talked about losing his mother to childbirth when he was 8, how his father had never remarried, but had poured all his love into his sons. About deciding to come to Arizona when they inherited the ranch, seeing it as a chance to build something of their own. Delilah told him about the happy years before her father died, the struggle afterward, her mother's strength and sacrifice. She talked about her fears and insecurities, about feeling adrift after her mother's death, about the terror of that night in the snow, and the relief of seeing him ride out of the storm like a guardian angel. "I wasn't an angel," Yates said. "Just a man who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Maybe that's what angels are," Delilah said. "Regular people who show up when they're most needed and do the right thing." As the night grew late, Yates walked her upstairs to her room, kissing her goodnight at the door with a sweetness that made her heart ache. "Sleep well," he murmured. "And Delilah, thank you for giving me a chance." "Thank you for taking a chance on me," she replied. "On both of us." The next morning, Daphne took one look at Delilah's face and squealed. "Something happened. Tell me everything." So Delilah did, and Daphne hugged her so hard she could barely breathe. "I'm so happy for you," Daphne said. "You deserve this, Dee. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are." Zachary returned from town that afternoon and immediately noticed the change, though he just gave Yates a knowing look and clapped him on the shoulder. "About time," was all he said, but his approval was clear. Over the following weeks, Delilah and Yates navigated their new relationship alongside their work on the ranch. They were careful not to let it interfere with their responsibilities, but the joy of being together colored everything. Yates would find excuses to come to the house during the day, stealing kisses in the kitchen when no one was looking. Delilah would bring him lunch in the fields, and they'd sit together watching the cattle graze, talking about nothing and everything. On Sundays, when the work eased a bit, they'd ride out together to explore the ranch lands, discovering hidden valleys and rocky outcrops with stunning views. Yates taught her to ride better, to read the land, to understand the rhythm of the seasons in the desert. Delilah soaked it all in, falling in love not just with him but with this place, this life they were building. One afternoon in early March, they rode to a spot overlooking the ranch house, the entire property spread out below them in the golden afternoon light. Yates pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted, helping Delilah down and keeping his hands on her waist. "I love you," he said. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to know I mean it with everything I am. You've changed my life, Delilah." "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily now. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone. I want to spend my life with you, Yates said, his voice serious. "I want to build this ranch together, have a family together, grow old together. I want everything with you." Delilah's breath caught. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I don't have a ring yet," Yates said. "I wanted to talk to you first, make sure this is what you want. But yes, I'm asking. Will you marry me, Delilah Zimmerman? Will you be my wife, my partner, my love for the rest of our lives?" "Yes," Delilah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Yates swept her into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down and kissing her with a passion that made her knees weak. When they finally broke apart, both grinning like fools, he said, "We'll go to Coolidge tomorrow and get you a proper ring. And we'll do this right, have a real wedding with your sister and my brother and anyone else you want there." "I don't need a fancy wedding," Delilah said. "I just need you." "You'll have both," Yates promised. "Because you deserve everything, and I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." They told Daphne and Zachary that evening over dinner, and both reacted with enthusiastic support. Daphne cried happy tears and hugged them both, while Zachary shook Yates's hand and told Delilah she was getting a good man, even if he was occasionally an idiot. "When's the wedding?" Daphne asked. "We were thinking June," Yates said, glancing at Delilah for confirmation. "Gives us time to plan and get the ranch in good shape. Plus the weather will be perfect." "June is wonderful," Delilah agreed. "Though honestly, I'd marry you tomorrow if we could." "Don't tempt me," Yates said with a grin. "I might just take you up on that." They went to Coolidge the next day, and Yates bought her a ring from the jeweler, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light beautifully. It wasn't ostentatious or expensive, but Delilah loved it because it came from him, because it represented their promise to each other. Word of their engagement spread through the small community quickly. The neighbors they'd become friendly with congratulated them, and the pastor of the local church agreed to perform the ceremony. Delilah and Daphne spent their free time sewing a wedding dress, simple but elegant, while Yates and Zachary worked even harder on the ranch, determined to have everything perfect by June. Spring brought new life to the desert. Wildflowers bloomed in riotous color, the cattle thrived, and a sense of optimism pervaded everything. Delilah had never been happier, waking each morning to the realization that she was living a life she'd never dared to dream of. She had a home, a purpose, a sister who was flourishing, and a man who loved her with his whole heart. In late April, a letter arrived from Texas, forwarded through a series of contacts until it finally reached them. It was from Robert Winters, their former stepfather, and Delilah's hands shook as she opened it. The letter was short, barely a paragraph. Robert wrote that he'd been sober for 2 months now, attending meetings at his church, trying to become a better man. He acknowledged that what he'd done was unforgivable, that he'd nearly killed them through his cruelty and selfishness. He didn't ask for forgiveness, said he didn't deserve it, but wanted them to know he was sorry and hoped they'd found safety somewhere. Delilah read it twice, then handed it to Yates, who'd come to stand beside her when he saw her expression. "What do you want to do?" he asked after reading it. "I don't know," Delilah admitted. "Part of me wants to write back, tell him we're alive and safe and thriving despite what he did. Part of me wants to never think about him again." "Both responses are valid," Yates said carefully. "This is your choice, Delilah. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." In the end, Delilah wrote a brief reply. She told Robert they'd survived, that they'd found a good life in Arizona, and that while she couldn't forget what he'd done, she hoped he was sincere about changing. She didn't give him their address or any details that would allow him to find them. She simply wanted him to know they were okay and perhaps to ease some of his guilt if it was genuine. "I'm not doing it for him," she told Yates after mailing the letter. "I'm doing it for me. I don't want to carry anger around forever. It's too heavy. That's one of the things I love about you, Yates said, pulling her close. Your capacity for grace, even when it's not deserved. You're a better person than most, Delilah. I learned from my mother, Delilah said. She always said holding grudges was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I want to be free of that weight, free to be happy without shadows hanging over me. As June approached, preparations for the wedding intensified. Daphne proved to have an artistic eye, decorating the ranch house with wildflowers and making everything beautiful. Zachary built an arch from mesquite branches where they'd say their vows, positioning it to overlook the valley. Neighbors contributed food for the reception, turning it into a community celebration. The night before the wedding, Delilah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment, the losses and the miracles, the despair and the joy. A year ago she'd been grieving her mother, trapped in a house with a man who resented their existence. 6 months ago she'd been certain she would die in the snow. And now, tomorrow, she would marry the man she loved, surrounded by people who'd become family. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. "Come in," she called quietly. Daphne slipped inside, closing the door behind her. "Can't sleep either?" she asked, climbing into bed beside Delilah like they were children again. "Too excited," Delilah admitted, "and maybe a little nervous." "About marrying Yates?" "No, that part I'm sure of," Delilah said. "I think I'm nervous about being happy. Does that make sense? Like I'm waiting for something bad to happen because good things don't last." "Good things can last," Daphne said firmly. "We've had more than our share of bad luck. We're due for some good. And Yates loves you, D. Anyone can see that. He looks at you like you hung the moon." "I love him so much it scares me sometimes," Delilah confessed. "What if I lose him too? What if this happiness is temporary?" "Everything is temporary in one sense," Daphne said. "But that doesn't mean you shouldn't grab onto it and hold on tight. Tomorrow you're marrying a wonderful man who will do everything in his power to make you happy. That's worth celebrating, worth believing in." "When did you get so wise?" Delilah asked, hugging her sister. "I learned from you," Daphne said. "You've been taking care of me our whole lives. Now it's your turn to be taken care of. Let yourself have this, D. You deserve it." The wedding day dawned clear and bright, the temperature perfect, the sky an endless blue. Delilah woke early, her nervousness transformed into pure anticipation. She bathed and dressed with Daphne's help, donning the simple white dress they'd sewn together. It fit perfectly, the fabric flowing around her like water. Daphne wove wildflowers into Delilah's hair, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "You're so beautiful," she said, her eyes shining with tears. "Yates is going to lose his mind when he sees you." The ceremony was set for late afternoon, when the worst heat of the day had passed, but the light was still golden. Guests began arriving an hour before, neighbors and friends, and the handful of townsfolk from Coolidge who'd gotten to know them. It wasn't a large crowd, maybe 30 people, but it felt perfect. Zachary came to escort Delilah to the ceremony site, since her father was gone and Yates's father too. "You ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "More ready than I've ever been for anything," Delilah said. They walked together around the side of the house to where the arch stood, and Delilah's breath caught when she saw Yates waiting for her. He wore a new suit, his hair neatly combed, but it was the expression on his face that made her heart soar. He looked at her with such love, such awe, that she felt beautiful beyond measure. The pastor began the ceremony, but Delilah barely heard the traditional words. She was too focused on Yates, on the way his hands held hers, steady and strong, on the vows they spoke to each other. "I promise to love you through every season," Yates said, his voice thick with emotion. "Through the cold and the heat, the the good times and the hard times. I promise to be your partner, your supporter, your biggest champion. I promise to make you laugh, to hold you when you cry, to build a life with you that honors everything we've both been through. You're my heart, Delilah. You're my home. Delilah could barely see through her tears as she spoke her own vows. I promise to love you with everything I am, to stand beside you in building our life together, to respect your dreams and support your goals. I promise to never take for granted the miracle of finding you, of being found by you. You saved me, Yates, in every way a person can be saved. And I promise to spend the rest of my life showing you what that means to me. You're my forever. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with such tenderness that the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. They broke apart, both grinning, and turned to face their friends and family as Mr. and Mrs. Jameson. The reception was a joyful chaos of food and music and dancing. Someone had brought a fiddle, another a guitar, and soon people were dancing on the lawn as the sun set in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Yates pulled Delilah into his arms for their first dance as husband and wife, and she felt like she was floating. "Happy," he murmured in her ear. "Happier than I knew was possible," she replied. "This is perfect, you're perfect." "Not perfect, but I'm yours," he said. "Forever, just like I promised that first night, you and your sister, warm and safe forever." As night fell and lanterns were lit, casting everything in a soft glow, Delilah looked around at the life she'd found here. Daphne was laughing with one of the neighbor boys, her face bright with happiness. Zachary was deep in conversation with another rancher, probably talking cattle. Friends and neighbors mingled, celebrating not just a wedding but the success of the ranch, the building of community. And beside her, his hand clasped in hers, was Yates, her husband, her love, the man who'd ridden out of a storm and changed everything. They'd all suffered losses, all faced hardships that could have broken them. But they'd survived, and more than that, they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their grief. They'd found family in each other, found home in this harsh and lovely land. Later, after the guests had departed and Daphne and Zachary had retired to their rooms, Yates and Delilah stood on the porch watching the stars come out. The desert night was cool and clear, the air sweet with the scent of sage and wildflowers. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, his arm around her waist. "I'm thinking about that night in the snow," Delilah said. "How certain I was that we were going to die, and how you appeared like something out of a story and promised we'd be warm forever. You kept that promise, Yates, in every possible way." "We kept it together," he said. "You could have given up 100 times, but you didn't. You fought for your sister, for your future, for this life we're building. I'm in awe of you, Delilah, every single day." "I love you," she said simply. "Thank you for finding us. Thank you for seeing something worth saving." "Thank you for letting me love you," Yates replied, kissing her temple. "Thank you for making this house a home, for making me happier than I've ever been. Thank you for saying yes." They stood together in the starlight, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built love from loss and hope from despair. The ranch spread out around them, theirs now in every way that mattered. And ahead lay a future bright with possibility, with the promise of children and grandchildren, of a legacy built on love and hard work, and the courage to keep going even when everything seemed impossible. The winter night that had nearly killed them seemed like a lifetime ago now, like it had happened to different people. In a way, it had. They'd both been transformed by what followed, shaped by the choices they'd made and the love they'd found. As they finally went inside, ready to begin their first night as husband and wife, Delilah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided Yates through that storm. Fate, luck, providence, whatever name you wanted to give it, she was thankful. Thankful for every moment that had led her here, even the painful ones, because they'd all been necessary to bring her to this place, this man, this love. The years that followed were filled with the kind of happiness that comes from building something together. The ranch prospered beyond their initial hopes. Word spread about the quality of their cattle, and buyers came from as far as California and New Mexico. They expanded gradually, acquiring another 100 acres and hiring more help, but always keeping the operation small enough that it felt personal, like family. Daphne continued to live with them, becoming an invaluable part of the ranch operation. She had a gift with horses that led to them starting a small breeding program, training mounts that were sought after throughout the territory. She'd grown into a confident young woman, and when she was 21, she met a young veterinarian who'd moved to Coolidge. Their courtship was sweet and genuine, and when they married 2 years later, Delilah felt the same joy she'd felt at her own wedding. Zachary eventually married too, a widow from Coolidge with a young son. They built a house on the eastern edge of the ranch property, close enough to be part of the operation but far enough for privacy. The boy, Samuel, took to ranch life with enthusiasm, following Yates and Zachary around like a devoted shadow. But the greatest joy for Delilah and Yates came with the arrival of their children. Their first son, James, was born in the spring of their second year of marriage, a healthy baby with Yates's eyes and Delilah's determined chin. Holding him for the first time, Delilah wept with a mixture of joy and grief, wishing her mother could have met her grandson, knowing she would have loved him fiercely. "She knows," Yates had said softly, understanding without needing explanation. "Wherever she is, she knows, and she's happy for us." 2 years later, their daughter Sarah arrived, small and fierce from the first breath. Then another son, Thomas, and finally another daughter, Marie. The house that had once felt too big was suddenly filled with the sound of children's laughter, with toys scattered on the floor and little hands reaching for everything. Yates was a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching them to ride as soon as they could walk, sharing his love of the land and the animals. Delilah watched him with their children and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentleness and strength that had drawn her to him reflected in how he raised their family. They had their struggles, of course. There were years when the rains didn't come and the grass grew thin, years when illness swept through the herd, years when money was tight and worry kept them up at night. But they faced everything together, and somehow they always came through. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised her with a trip back to the canyon where he'd found her and Daphne. They rode out on a cool December morning, the air crisp, but nothing like that terrible blizzard night. "I wanted to show you something," he said, leading her to a spot near where his camp had been. There, driven into the rock, was a bronze plaque he'd had made. It read, "Here, 2 lives were saved and a love story began. December 15, 1884. May those who pass this way remember that hope can be found in the darkest moments." Delilah traced the words with her fingers, tears streaming down her face. "Yates, this is beautiful. I wanted there to be something to mark the place," he said, "because what happened here changed everything. It gave me you, gave us our life together. That's worth commemorating." She turned to him, this man who'd saved her in every way possible, who'd kept every promise he'd ever made. "I love you so much, more now than even on our wedding day, because I know you better now. I know your heart, your soul, the depth of your goodness, and I'm grateful every day that you were riding through this canyon that night. I'm grateful I listened when something told me to help," Yates said. Best decision I ever made, stopping for 2 freezing women in the snow. They stood together in the canyon, older now but still deeply in love, still partners in every sense of the word. The ranch was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and they'd built a life that honored both the struggle that brought them together and the love that sustained them. As they rode back to the ranch, Delilah thought about the girl she'd been that terrible night. So certain death was coming, so desperate to save her sister. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be okay, that the cowboy riding toward her through the storm wasn't just saving her life, but giving her a future more beautiful than anything she'd dared to imagine. But maybe she didn't need to. Maybe that girl, cold and frightened and determined, was still part of her, a reminder of how far she'd come and how much she'd survived. Maybe that's what made the happiness sweeter, knowing what it had cost, knowing what they'd overcome together. Years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren and then great-grandchildren. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations who heard the story of how it all began, how Yates had found Delilah and Daphne in a blizzard and promised they'd be warm forever. They grew old together, Delilah and Yates, their hair turning silver but their love never dimming. On quiet evenings, they'd sit on the porch they'd rebuilt twice over the years, watching the sunset paint the desert in colors that never got old, holding hands like they had when they first fell in love. No regrets. Yates would sometimes ask, a question that had become almost ritual between them. Not a single one, Delilah would always answer. You gave me everything, Yates. Love, family, home, purpose. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me the same, he'd say. Made me better than I was, taught me what love really means. Best night of my life, riding through that storm and finding you. On Delilah's 70th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she looked around the ranch house that had become a true home and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The scared girl who'd nearly frozen to death had become a woman who'd lived fully, loved deeply, and built something lasting. She caught Yates's eye across the crowded room, and he smiled at her, the same smile that had made her heart flutter 40-some years ago. Some things, she thought, never changed. The love between them had only grown stronger, deepened by time and shared experience, by the life they'd built together from nothing but determination and faith. When the party finally ended and the house was quiet again, just the two of them, Yates pulled her close on the sofa where they'd first confessed their love. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, knowing her well enough to see the reflection in her eyes. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are," Delilah said. "How easily things could have gone differently. If you'd ridden a different route that night, if you'd decided to shelter somewhere else, if you hadn't stopped when you saw us. So many small choices that led to this." "I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Yates said. "Maybe that's foolish, but I believe it. Some connections are meant to be." "Maybe you're right," Delilah agreed. "But I'm still grateful for every choice that brought us together, for every moment we've had since." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of knowing someone completely. Outside, the desert night settled in, cool and star-filled and peaceful. Somewhere in the barn, a horse nickered softly. From the direction of Zachary's house, the sound of laughter drifted on the breeze. This was their legacy, Delilah thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the buildings, but the family they'd created, the love they'd nurtured, the community they'd built. From 2 desperate women in a snowstorm and 1 compassionate cowboy had come generations of life, of joy, of people who would carry forward the values they'd tried to instill. "You kept your promise," Delilah said softly, her head resting on Yates's shoulder. "That first night you said we'd be warm forever, and we have been. Not just physically warm, but warm in all the ways that matter. Loved and safe and cherished. You gave us that. We gave it to each other, Yates corrected gently. I might have provided the shelter that night, but you're the one who made it a home. You're the one who taught me what it means to really love someone, to build a life together. You're my heart, Delilah. You always have been. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom that night, moving slower than they once had but still together, Delilah thought about the words on the plaque in the canyon. Hope can be found in the darkest moments. She'd lived that truth, had been saved by it, had built a lifetime on it. The blizzard that had nearly killed them had instead brought them together, had set in motion everything that followed. The cold that almost took their lives had led them to a warmth that had lasted, just as Yates promised, forever. They'd been young once, she and Yates, full of energy and dreams and determination. Now they were old, but the dreams had been realized, the determination had paid off, and the energy had transformed into something deeper, a quiet contentment that came from a life well lived. Delilah fell asleep that night as she had every night for over 40 years, wrapped in Yates's arms, surrounded by love. The last thought before sleep claimed her was simple but profound. She was happy. Despite everything she'd lost, everything she'd endured, she'd found happiness that lasted. And somewhere in the universe, she liked to think her mother was smiling, knowing her daughters had not just survived but thrived, had found love and built lives that honored her memory. The legacy of strength and grace she'd passed to them had been the foundation for everything that followed. The ranch continued to prosper in the years that followed, even as Delilah and Yates gradually handed over more responsibilities to their children. They'd raised them well, instilling values of hard work, compassion, and integrity. The ranch would be in good hands when they were gone, would continue to be a place of love and family for generations to come. But they weren't gone yet, weren't ready to give up the life they'd built together. They still took rides together on cool mornings, still danced in the kitchen when a song they loved played on the radio, still held hands whenever they sat together. Age had slowed them but not diminished what they felt for each other. On a morning in early winter, nearly 45 years after that fateful blizzard, Delilah woke to find fresh snow dusting the desert, a rare sight even in December. She stood at the window watching it fall, remembering another snowfall that had nearly ended her story before it truly began. Yates came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, a question he'd been asking for decades, always genuinely interested in her answer. "I'm thinking about how beautiful it is," Delilah said. "Snow used to terrify me after that night. For years, whenever it snowed, I'd have nightmares about being lost in the cold. But now I can appreciate it again, because I know I'm safe, because you're here." "I'll always be here," Yates said. "For as long as I have breath, I'll be right here beside you." And he was. They lived another 15 years together, growing older but never apart, their love a constant in a changing world. They saw Arizona become a state, saw automobiles replace horses on the roads, saw their great-grandchildren grow into adults with families of their own. When Yates finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89, Delilah grieved deeply, but without despair. They'd had 59 years together, longer than many people got with their loves. They'd built a life that mattered, raised children who carried forward their values, created a legacy that would endure. She lived another 3 years without him, supported by her children and surrounded by love, but everyone could see that part of her had gone with Yates. They'd been two halves of a whole for so long that being apart felt unnatural. On a quiet afternoon in spring, with the desert in full bloom and the windows open to let in the warm breeze, Delilah passed away in the same bed, where she'd slept with Yates for decades. Her children were with her, holding her hands, telling her it was okay to go. Her last words were, "Tell Yates I'm coming. Tell him I kept my promise too." They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The entire community turned out to pay respects to a woman who'd touched so many lives, who'd shown them what strength and grace looked like, who'd loved completely and lived fully. On their shared headstone, beneath their names and dates, their children had inscribed, "They saved each other, built a life together, loved forever." The ranch continued, passed to the next generation and the next, but the story of how it began was never forgotten. Every child born into the family eventually heard the tale of the blizzard, the cowboy, the promise that was kept. It became legend, the foundation myth of their family, a reminder of where they came from and what mattered most. The plaque in the canyon remained, a silent marker of the place where everything changed. Occasionally, hikers would stumble across it and wonder about the story behind those words. Some would ride into the ranch and ask, and whoever was there would smile and invite them in for coffee and tell them about Yates and Delilah, about love found in the darkest moment, about promises kept forever. And on winter nights when the wind howled and snow fell rare but beautiful on the Arizona desert, the family would gather in the house that Delilah had made a home, and they'd remember. They'd remember the strength it took to survive, the courage it took to hope, the grace it took to love. They'd remember that, from the worst of circumstances, can come the best of lives, that help can arrive from unexpected places, that love can heal almost anything. The ranch stood as testament to what two people could build when they faced life together, when they kept their promises, when they chose love over fear every single day. It stood as proof that happy endings aren't just in fairy tales, that sometimes the cowboy really does ride in and save the day. That warm forever isn't just a comforting lie but a truth that can be lived and passed down through generations. And somewhere beyond the reach of mortal understanding, Yates and Delilah were together again, watching over the family they'd created, the legacy they'd built, the love that had started with a blizzard and a promise and had grown into something that would truly last forever. The cold had brought them together, but it was the warmth they created, the warmth they shared, the warmth they gave to everyone around them that defined their story. In the end, that's what mattered most. Not the struggle or the hardship or the pain, though those were real and had shaped them. What mattered was what they built from those experiences, the beauty they created from ashes, the love that not only endured but flourished. They'd both been abandoned in different ways, Delilah by her stepfather and circumstance, Yates by the loss of his parents. But they'd found each other in that abandonment, had created family from loss, had proven that being alone doesn't have to be permanent, that new beginnings can come from terrible endings. The cowboy had said they'd be warm forever, and it was true. The warmth of their love had spread outward in ripples, touching their children, their grandchildren, their community, everyone who came into contact with the family they'd built. It was a warmth that transcended physical comfort, that spoke to something deeper, more essential. It was the warmth of being known completely and loved anyway. The warmth of having someone who would ride through any storm to reach you. The warmth of building something together that outlasts your own lifetime. The warmth of promises kept, of love honored, of faith justified. And so the story ended where all good love stories end. With a love that transcended death, with a legacy that honored the struggle, with a family that would carry forward the lessons learned. The girl who'd nearly frozen in the snow had become a woman who'd warmed countless lives. The cowboy who'd stopped to help had become a man who'd shown generations what true love looked like. They'd saved each other, all those years ago in a snowstorm that shouldn't have happened in the Arizona desert. And in saving each other, they'd created something beautiful, something lasting, something worth remembering. Their love story became legend, but it had started as so many do, with two people who needed each other, found each other, and chose each other every day for the rest of their lives. And they lived warm forever, just as promised, in the hearts of everyone they'd touched, in the family they'd created, in the love that would never die as long as anyone remembered their story. It was a happy ending earned through hardship, sweetened by struggle, made precious by the knowledge of how easily it could have been otherwise. From a desperate moment in freezing darkness had come a lifetime of light and warmth. From a chance encounter between strangers had come a love that defined generations. From a simple promise, "You'll both be warm forever," had come a truth that endured beyond the grave, beyond time, beyond anything that could diminish or destroy it. And in the end, that's what made it a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down. Not just that they'd found love, but that they'd honored it, nurtured it, built a life on it that blessed everyone around them. They'd taken the worst of circumstances and created the best of lives, proving that sometimes, against all odds, the right person appears at the right moment, and everything changes. The snow had nearly killed them. Instead, it brought them together. And from that frozen beginning came a warmth that truly did last forever in every way that mattered. Their story was complete, their promises kept, their love eternal. And that, finally, was enough.